The air inside the restaurant was always cool, kept at a perfect temperature that made sure the people eating expensive food never felt too warm. But for Lisa, who had been running around for 6 hours straight, the air conditioning just made her shiver in her thin uniform. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, quickly checking to make sure no one was watching. It was a busy night, a Friday, and the place was packed. Every table was full, and the noise of conversations, silverware hitting plates, and glasses clinking filled the room like a heavy blanket. Lisa was 24 years old, tired, and her feet hurt. She wore black shoes that were supposed to be non-slip and comfortable. But after moving back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room 50 times, they felt like blocks of concrete. She looked down at the small notepad in her hand, scribbling down an order for a table of businessmen who were talking loudly about stocks and money. They didn't even look at her when she took the order. To them, she was just a shadow that brought water and bread. "Table 7 needs 2 more waters," the chef shouted from the kitchen pass as Lisa dropped off the ticket. She nodded and grabbed a pitcher. Her arms felt heavy, but she kept moving. She needed this job. Every tip she earned went into a jar hidden in her closet at home, a jar that was supposed to take her to music school one day. That jar was her only hope. As she walked back onto the floor, weaving through the narrow spaces between tables, her eyes drifted toward the far corner of the room. It was the quietest spot in the whole building. There, bathed in a soft, golden light from a hanging lamp, sat the grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shiny, looking like a sleeping beast waiting to wake up. Lisa slowed down for just a second. Her heart gave a little jump in her chest. She loved that piano. She had played it once, months ago, late at night after the restaurant closed when the manager wasn't looking. She remembered how the keys felt under her fingers, cool, smooth, and responsive. But she knew she wasn't allowed to touch it. It was for the professional musicians they hired on weekends, not for the waitresses who spilled soup and carried trays. "Watch it, coming through," a voice said sharply. Lisa jumped, realizing she had stopped walking and was blocking the way. A server, carrying a large tray of steaks, glared at her as he squeezed past. She muttered a quick sorry and hurried to table 7 to pour the water. She felt her face get hot with embarrassment. She needed to focus. She couldn't afford to make mistakes or daydream about piano she couldn't play. After she filled the glasses, she leaned against the service station for a moment to catch her breath. The room was buzzing. It was the kind of place where people came to see and be seen. There were women in sparkling jewelry and men in tailored suits. The atmosphere was fancy, but for Lisa, it was just a lot of work. She felt invisible, like a ghost floating through a world of rich people. That was when she noticed him. He was sitting at the large, round table in the center of the room. He was alone. That was unusual for this restaurant. Usually, the big tables were full of groups having parties or business meetings. But this man sat by himself, looking at a glass of wine like he was bored. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that looked like he had seen a lot of the world. He was wearing a suit that looked more expensive than everything Lisa owned put together. She knew who he was, or at least she thought she did. She had seen his face on the covers of magazines in the grocery store checkout line. He was a tycoon, a man who owned hotels and buildings, and who had more money than most small countries. People whispered his name when he walked by, but he didn't seem to care about the attention. He just sat there, quietly sipping his drink. Looking around the room with eyes that seemed tired, Lisa straightened her apron. It was her job to check on him. She took a deep breath, put on her best customer service smile, and walked over to his table. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Is everything all right with your wine? Can I get you anything else to start?" The man looked up. His eyes weren't cold or mean like some of the customers who treated staff like dirt. They were kind, but serious. He looked at her face, really looked at her, not through her. It made Lisa feel a little nervous, like he could see past her uniform and the tiredness. "The wine is fine, thank you," he said. His voice was deep and calm. "It is a bit loud in here tonight, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Lisa agreed. "It is a very busy Friday. Everyone seems to be out tonight." "I suppose," he said. He turned his head and looked toward the empty stage in the corner where the piano sat. It is a shame that such a beautiful instrument is sitting there silent. Music makes the food taste better, I think. Lisa's fingers twitched at her side. She wanted to say, I can play it. She wanted to tell him that she knew songs that would make the wine taste like magic. But she bit her tongue. She was just a waitress. She didn't say things like that to millionaires. We have a pianist coming in tomorrow night for the Saturday rush, she said politely instead. He is very good. I'm sure he is, the man said, turning his attention back to her. But sometimes the scheduled performance isn't as interesting as something unexpected. He smiled a very small smile. Lisa didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. I will let you know when your appetizer is ready, sir. Thank you, he said. Lisa walked away, feeling a strange tingling on the back of her neck. She went back to the kitchen, grabbed a tray of food for another table, and got back to work. She cleared plates, refilled water glasses, and apologized for a long wait. The minutes ticked by, and her feet hurt more and more, but her mind kept going back to that corner table. The rich man was still sitting there, watching the room. Every time she passed him, he was looking around, observing the people, observing the staff. Once, when she was walking past the piano to clear a table nearby, she stopped for just a split second. She stared at the keys. She was so close. If she just reached out her hand, she could touch one key, just one note to hear how it sounded in the empty air. But she knew better. The manager was walking the floor. If she touched the piano, she would lose her job. And losing her job meant losing the dream of music school forever. She sighed and turned to leave. But as she turned, she tripped slightly on the edge of the carpet. She didn't fall, but she stumbled, and her hand reached out to steady herself against the piano bench. It made a scraping sound against the floor. The sound wasn't loud, but in the quiet corner, it echoed. She quickly pulled her hand back and looked around, terrified that someone had seen her mistake. The manager was on the other side of the room. The only person looking was the Tycoon. He was watching her intently. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't annoyed. He was just watching her with a look of curiosity, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Lisa felt her face turn red. She straightened up quickly and rushed away to the safety of the kitchen, her heart pounding. She leaned against the stainless steel counter in the back and closed her eyes for a second. She felt silly. Why did she care so much about the piano? Why did it feel like her chest was going to explode every she walked past it? Order up for table 4, the chef called out, breaking her thoughts. Lisa shook her hands out and grabbed the plates. She had to get it together. She had 3 more hours of her shift left. She couldn't let the dream of the piano mess up her reality. She was a waitress. That was her job. She picked up the plates and pushed the swinging door open, marching back out into the noise of the dining room, ready to disappear into the background again. But the feeling of the man's eyes on her back stayed with her, following her around the room like a spotlight she couldn't turn off. The restaurant was getting louder as the night went on. More people came in, shaking off the cold wind from outside and bringing in bursts of laughter and strong perfume. For Lisa, the work didn't get easier. It just got heavier. Her tray felt heavier, and the polite smile she had to paste on her face was starting to hurt her cheeks. She moved from table to table, dropping off steaming plates of pasta and pouring glasses of red wine, trying her best to be invisible. In a place like this, the best waiters were the ones you didn't notice. They were like furniture, helpful, quiet, and always there when you needed something. The wealthy man at the center table was still there. He had finished his glass of wine and ordered a simple dinner. While other people around him were taking pictures of their food or talking loudly on their phones, he ate slowly and quietly. He seemed to be watching everything. He watched the waiters rushing around with their heads down. He watched the couples holding hands across the tables. And mostly, he watched Lisa. Lisa felt his gaze every time she walked past. It wasn't a creepy stare. It was curious. It made her nervous, so she tried to avoid looking directly at him. She was afraid that if she made eye contact, he would complain about something. Maybe the water wasn't cold enough, or maybe he didn't like the way she looked. She had dealt with difficult customers before. She knew that some people just enjoyed being mean to staff because they could. But he didn't look mean. He just looked like he was thinking deeply about something. About an hour into her shift, the restaurant started to feel like a pressure cooker. A large group of tourists came in without a reservation. The hostess was trying to squeeze them into a tight space near the bar. Tables were being moved. People were bumping into each other. The calm atmosphere that the restaurant usually tried to keep was breaking down. Lisa was trying to carry a large tray full of dirty dishes from a table that had just left. It was a heavy load, stacked high with plates and leftover food. She leaned back to balance the weight, her muscles straining. As she walked past the bar, a waiter coming the other way wasn't looking where he was going. He spun around quickly to grab a napkin and crashed right into Lisa. It happened in slow motion. Lisa tried to steady herself, but the tray tipped. A glass slid off and shattered on the floor, sending shards of glass and splashes of soda everywhere. Lisa managed to save the plates, but she stumbled, her foot sliding on the wet floor. She didn't fall, but she dropped to one knee to catch herself, scraping her skin against the hard tiles. The noise of the crash silenced the nearby tables. The music from the speakers seemed to thump louder in the sudden quiet. Lisa's heart stopped. She looked up and saw the waiter looking at her with wide eyes. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't see you. It's okay," Lisa said quickly, her face burning with shame. She scrambled to pick up the pieces of the broken glass. She could feel people looking at her. She felt small and clumsy. This was exactly what she was afraid of. In front of everyone, she had made a mess. She hurriedly swept the glass into a dustpan, her hands shaking slightly. She wanted to cry, but she swallowed the lump in her throat. She stood up, took the heavy tray of dirty dishes, and practically ran toward the kitchen to escape the stairs. As she rushed past the grand piano in the corner, she caught a glimpse of the wealthy man. He wasn't eating. He had put his fork down. He was looking right at her. She pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, dropped the tray onto the counter with a loud clang. She leaned against the metal sink and took a deep, shaky breath. A few tears escaped her eyes and she quickly wiped them away. She hated feeling like this. She hated being treated like she didn't matter, just because she served food for a living. She took a moment to wash her hands, letting the cold water calm her down. She looked at her reflection in the shiny metal toaster. "Get it together," she told herself. "You are strong. You are good at what you do. Don't let them see you cry." She fixed her hair, took a deep breath, and walked back out onto the floor. The mess had been cleaned up by another staff member. The restaurant was back to its noisy self. Lisa decided to go check on the wealthy man to see if he needed anything else. It was the last thing she wanted to do, but it was her job. As she approached his table, she noticed he wasn't eating anymore. He was sitting back in his chair, looking thoughtful. She put on her smile again. "Is everything okay with your meal, sir? Can I get you anything else? Perhaps some coffee or dessert?" The man looked at her. He looked at the red mark on her knee, where she had scraped it on the floor. He looked at her hands, which were rough and red from working so hard. "I am fine, thank you," he said. His voice was kind. "I saw what happened earlier." "Are you all right?" Lisa was surprised. Most customers wouldn't even notice a waitress falling unless it delayed their food. "I am fine, sir. Just a little clumsy tonight." "I am sorry if it disturbed your dinner." "Didn't disturb me," he said. "It actually made me think. You work very hard." "I have been watching you." Lisa shifted her weight uncomfortably. "I try to do a good job, sir." "You do an excellent job," he said. "But I noticed something else. Earlier, when you walked past the piano, you looked at it very differently than you look at the tables." Lisa froze. Her heart skipped a beat. How did he know? She thought she had been hiding her glances. "Hey, I just like the music," she stammered. "Do you play?" he asked. Lisa looked down at her feet. She felt a conflict inside her. She wanted to tell the truth, but she was afraid of sounding foolish. This man was a tycoon, a business giant. He probably knew famous musicians and went to operas. What would he care about a waitress who played on cheap keyboards in her apartment? "I used to play a long time ago," she admitted quietly. "It's been a while." "Music isn't like riding a bike," the man said, leaning forward slightly. "You don't just forget how to speak the language once you know it." "I think you still play." Lisa didn't know what to say. She felt naked under his gaze. like he could see the dream she kept locked away in the jar in her closet. She looked around the restaurant, hoping a manager would call her name so she could escape. But the coast was clear. "It's a beautiful instrument," the man continued, nodding his head toward the grand piano standing silently in the corner. "It is a shame it is sitting there empty. It feels lonely, don't you think?" Lisa looked over at the piano. The spotlight hit the shiny black wood, making it glow. It did look lonely. It looked like it was waiting for someone to bring it to life. She felt a pull in her chest, a strong desire to walk over there and sit down. But she knew the rules. "It is for the professionals, sir," Lisa said politely. "Not for staff." The man was silent for a moment. He looked at the piano, then back at Lisa, then at the manager who was standing near the front door counting money. Sometimes, the man said softly, the professionals forget why they started playing. They play for money, for applause, for ego, but sometimes the person who plays for the love of the music. They are the ones who play the best. He picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth, then signaled for the check. Lisa was relieved. The conversation was getting too personal. It was making her heart beat too fast. "I will get your bill, sir," she said. "Wait," he said. "Before you go? Do me a favor?" Lisa waited, her pen hovering over her pad. "If you had the chance to play right now," he asked, "what song would you play?" The question caught her off guard. She didn't have to think about it. The answer was right there, sitting in the back of her mind. It was the song she played when she was sad, or when she was tired, or when she needed to feel like herself again. "Chopin," she said without thinking. "Nocturne in E-flat major. Opus 9, number 2. The man raised his eyebrows. He looked impressed. "That is a difficult piece. It requires a gentle touch, a feeling of deep emotion." Lisa blushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ramble on." "No," the man said, his eyes twinkling. "You didn't ramble. You told the truth. That is rare in this city." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He placed a large amount of cash on the table, far more than the cost of the meal. "Keep the change," he said. "You earned it tonight, just by surviving." "Thank you, sir," Lisa said, genuinely touched. "You are very kind." "Kindness is easy when you see someone worth being kind to," he replied. Lisa picked up the money and walked away, feeling confused but lighter. She felt like she had just had a secret conversation with a ghost. As she walked toward the register to process the payment, she felt a strange energy in the air. The man didn't leave. He stayed in his chair, watching the room, his eyes occasionally drifting back to the empty piano. He looked like a man who was waiting for something to happen. He looked like a man who was about to make a move in a game only he understood. Lisa handed the money to the manager, but her mind was still back at that table. She had a feeling that the night wasn't over yet. She felt like the silence in the corner was about to be broken. Lisa walked behind the long bar counter to count the cash the man had given her. Her hands were shaking a little, not just because of the fall earlier, but because of the strange conversation she had just had. She smoothed out the bills on the countertop. It was a lot of money. It was enough to pay her rent for the month and still have some left over for groceries. She felt a wave of relief wash over her, but also a pang of guilt. She hadn't done anything special to deserve this. She had just dropped a glass and talked about a song she liked. She handed the stack of money to the manager, a thin man named Mr. Henderson, who always seemed stressed. He looked at the bills, his eyes widening, and then he looked at Lisa with surprise. "He left all of this?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice going up a pitch. "Just for one glass of wine and a simple meal?" "Yes, sir," Lisa said. "He was very kind. He said I earned it." Mr. Henderson shook his head in disbelief, carefully putting the money into the register. It must be nice to have money to throw around like that. "Make sure you thank him properly before he leaves. We want to keep customers like that happy." "I will, sir," Lisa promised. She took a deep breath and walked back out onto the floor. The restaurant had changed again. The main dinner rush was slowing down. The noise level had dropped from a roar to a busy hum. A few tables had emptied out, leaving behind empty plates and crumpled napkins. The atmosphere felt a little looser, like people were relaxing after eating their big meals. Lisa headed back to the center. table to check on the wealthy man one last time. She assumed he would be getting his coat and leaving soon. Most people didn't stay long after they paid the bill. But as she got closer, she saw that he hadn't moved. He was still sitting in his chair, looking perfectly relaxed. He was looking around the room with a calm focus, like he was waiting for a show to start. She stopped at the side of his table. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir? Perhaps a coffee while you rest." The man looked up at her and smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No coffee, thank you. I am perfectly fine." Lisa waited, expecting him to stand up. When he didn't, she politely said, "Here's your receipt whenever you are ready." "Thank you very much for your generosity." He didn't take the receipt from her hand. Instead, he looked past her, toward the front of the restaurant where the mater d'. A tall man named Roger was standing by the podium. The Tycoon raised his hand slightly and snapped his fingers. It wasn't a rude snap. It was just a signal to get attention. Roger, who was busy adjusting the tie of his uniform, looked over. When he saw who was calling him, his eyes went wide, and he hurried over. He walked fast, smoothing his jacket, trying to look as professional as possible. "Mr. Vance," Roger said, sounding a little too eager. "Is everything to your liking tonight? Was the wine up to your standards?" The man, Mr. Vance, Lisa now knew, nodded slowly. "Everything was excellent, Roger. The service, the food, the atmosphere. You run a fine establishment." "Thank you, sir." "We are honored to have you," Roger beamed. Lisa stood there holding the receipt, feeling a bit awkward. She didn't want to interrupt, but she couldn't just walk away while Roger was talking to him. "Hey, there is just one thing," Mr. Vance said, his voice dropping slightly so that only Roger and Lisa could hear. "Of course, sir. Anything," Roger said, leaning in. "I find myself bored with the recorded music," Mr. Vance said, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling speakers where soft jazz was playing. "And I see that the piano is sitting over there completely empty. It feels wasteful." Roger blinked. "Oh well, sir, we don't have a live pianist on Fridays. Only on Saturdays. But if you would like, I can change the radio station to something else." "No, no," Mr. Vance said, shaking his head. "I don't want the radio. I want the piano." He paused for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Lisa shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She had a bad feeling about where this was going. Mr. Vance turned his head and looked directly at Lisa. "This young lady told me she plays." She mentioned a specific chop-in piece. "Nocturne number 2. Roger turned to look at Lisa, his eyebrows shooting up. He looked confused. He looked at Lisa like he had never seen her before, even though she had worked there for 2 years. "Lisa, you play?" Lisa felt her face turn hot. Every eye at the nearby tables seemed to turn toward them. Her heart started beating faster, like a drum in her chest. I used to, sir." "A long time ago." "Nonsense," Mr. Vance said firmly. "Music stays with you. I would like to hear her play." Roger laughed a nervous laugh. "Oh, sir, that is very kind of you, but our staff policy is very strict. Only hired entertainers are allowed on the stage. And, well, Lisa is on the clock. She has tables to clean." "I am sure the other customers can wait a few minutes for their plates to be cleared," Mr. Vance said. His voice wasn't mean, but it was very strong. It was a voice that was used to giving orders and having them followed. "And as for the policy, I believe I can make an exception. After all, I am the one paying the bill tonight, aren't I?" Lisa froze. The restaurant felt incredibly quiet. She could feel the pressure building up inside her. She just wanted to run away. She wanted to hide in the kitchen. She looked at Mr. Vance and whispered, "Sir, please. I can't. I'm in my uniform. I haven't practiced in months. I would embarrass myself." Mr. Vance stood up. He wasn't a huge man, but he had a presence that made him feel huge. He buttoned his jacket and looked at Lisa with kind but serious eyes. "You would not embarrass yourself," he said softly. "I have watched you tonight. I see how you carry yourself. You have a grace that cannot be taught in a waitressing manual. You have music in your soul, Lisa. It would be a crime to let it stay hidden." Lisa looked down at her black shoes. She felt tears stinging her eyes again. She wanted to play. Oh, how she wanted to play. She could almost feel the keys under her fingers. But the fear was holding her back. What if she forgot the notes? What if she was rusty? What if people laughed? The piano is just wood and strings, Mr. Vance said, as if reading her mind. It cannot hurt you. But keeping your gift locked away, that hurts you every single day. He looked at Roger. Roger, please bring the lady to the piano. Roger looked at Mr. Vance, then at Lisa, then at the piano in the corner. He looked terrified of making the customer angry, but he also looked worried about breaking the rules. But Mr. Vance was the most important person in the room. Finally, Roger nodded slowly. All right, Roger said, sighing. Lisa, if Mr. Vance insists, I suppose it is okay. Just for one song? Lisa looked at the manager, her mouth open slightly. She couldn't believe this was happening. But Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson is busy in the office, Roger said quickly. Just go, before he comes out. Mr. Vance gestured toward the corner. After you. Lisa felt like she was walking in a dream. Her legs felt heavy as she walked away from the safety of the tables and toward the spotlight in the corner. She could feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant on her. The conversations had stopped. People were putting down their forks to watch. Waitresses were stopping in the middle of their work to stare. She reached the piano. Up close, it looked even bigger and more beautiful than usual. The black polish was shiny like a mirror. The white keys looked perfect, untouched. It smelled like lemon polish and old wood. She stood in front of the bench, hesitating. She looked back at the dining room. It seemed like a mile away. Mr. Vance was standing next to her table, watching her with his arms crossed. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. He didn't look like a scary tycoon anymore. He looked like a teacher waiting for a student to solve a problem. Lisa took a deep breath. She looked down at her uniform. She was still wearing her apron with the stain from earlier. Her hands were rough from work. But she was here. She was standing in front of a grand piano in a fancy restaurant, invited by a billionaire. Sit, Mr. Vance's voice carried across the room, not loud, but clear. Lisa sat down on the bench. It was firm and comfortable. She lifted her hands and hovered them over the keys. For a second, her mind went blank. The panic rose in her throat. I can't do this, she thought. I'm going to fail. But then, she remembered the jar in her closet. She remembered all the nights she stayed up practicing on a keyboard with missing keys. She remembered the feeling of music being the only thing that understood her when she was lonely. She closed her eyes. She blocked out the people. She blocked out the clinking of glasses. She imagined she was back in her bedroom, safe and alone. She let her hands drop. Her fingers touched the keys. They were cool. She pressed down the first chord. The sound rang out, clear and beautiful, cutting through the noise of the restaurant like a knife. It was the E-flat major chord. It was the beginning of the song. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The sound of the first chord hung in the air like a suspended note of magic. For a second, Lisa felt a spike of panic, terrified that the strings might be old or out of tune, ruining the moment before it even began. But the sound was perfect. It was rich, full, and incredibly deep. It vibrated through the wooden bench and into her bones, chasing away the cold tiredness she had felt all night. The restaurant, which had been buzzing with low whispers and the clinking of silverware, went completely silent. It was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. Lisa kept her eyes closed for another moment, just breathing. She could feel the familiar roughness of the piano keys against her fingertips, a sensation she missed more than she realized. She wasn't a waitress wiping tables right now. She wasn't a tired girl worrying about rent. She was just a pair of hands and a heart connected to this machine. She let her muscle memory take over. Her left hand found the bass line, walking slowly down the scale, setting a rhythm that felt like a slow heartbeat. Then, her right hand began to move. The melody started to flow. It was the Chopin Nocturne, a song she had played 1,000 times in her head, but hadn't touched on a real instrument in years. At first, her fingers felt a little stiff, like they were waking up from a long sleep. But as the music continued, the stiffness melted away. The notes began to pour out of her, smooth and liquid. It wasn't just playing the right notes. It was the way she held them, the way she let them linger in the air before fading away. She played the opening theme with a gentle touch, soft and whispering, like a secret being told in the dark, in the silence of the room. The music seemed to grow, filling up every empty space. It wrapped around the tables, over the pristine white tablecloths, and over the expensive dishes. People stopped eating. A waiter froze halfway through pouring wine, the bottle tilted in midair, completely forgotten. Even the kitchen staff, who usually yelled orders and banged pans, had stopped to listen through the service window. The music was too beautiful to ignore. It demanded attention, not because it was loud or flashy, but because it was full of raw, honest emotion. Lisa forgot where she was. She forgot about the stain on her apron and the scrape on her knee. She forgot about the customers watching her. In her mind, she was back in her small apartment, playing on an old keyboard late at night when the neighbors were asleep. She poured all her tiredness, all her dreams, and all her hidden sadness into the keys. The music swelled, getting louder and more intense, climbing up the scales like a bird taking flight. It was a sound of longing, of reaching for something that was just out of reach. Mr. Vance stood still near his table. He had his arms crossed over his chest, and a small, peaceful smile rested on his face. He watched Lisa's posture. He saw the way she leaned into the piano, the way her shoulders relaxed. He saw that the uniform didn't matter anymore. The transformation was complete. The invisible waitress was gone, replaced by a brilliant artist who commanded the room. This was exactly what he had hoped for. He knew he hadn't just paid for a meal. He had paid to unlock a door that had been shut for too long. The song reached its middle section, where the notes became faster and more complicated. Lisa's fingers danced across the ivory keys, trilling and turning, moving with a speed that surprised her. She felt a rush of adrenaline. She wasn't thinking about what note came next. Her hands just knew. The music became a river, flowing fast and free. It was intense and passionate, sweeping everyone up in its current. A young couple sitting near the window stopped holding hands and just stared at the piano, mesmerized. The woman wiped a tear from her eye, touched by the sadness and the beauty of the melody. Then slowly, the music began to calm down. The rush of notes slowed, returning to the gentle rhythm of the beginning. Lisa brought the volume down, making the notes soft and delicate again. She played the final phrases with a tenderness that made the air feel heavy with emotion. She approached the end of the song, her hands moving carefully, savoring every last note. She played the final chord. She let her fingers rest on the keys, letting the sound vibrate and slowly fade into silence until there was nothing left but the hum of the room. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence was heavy and sacred. It was the kind of silence that happens after something truly important has been said. Lisa sat there, her hands still hovering over the keys, her breath coming fast. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Slowly, the reality of where she was came rushing back. She opened her eyes and looked around. The spell broke. Suddenly, a sound came from the back of the room. It was the clapping of a single pair of hands. It was Mr. Vance. He wasn't clapping loudly or quickly. He was clapping with a steady, respectful rhythm. Then, another person joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite, quiet clapping people usually gave to street performers. It was loud, enthusiastic, and genuine. People were smiling. Some were standing up. A few people were even cheering. Lisa's face turned bright red. She stood up quickly from the bench, her legs feeling a little wobbly. She looked down at her shoes, feeling overwhelmed. She didn't know what to do. She felt exposed, like she had taken off her skin and shown her heart to the world. Mr. Vance walked over to the piano. The crowd parted for him like the sea. He stopped in front of Lisa and looked at her with eyes full of respect. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the applause. "That was the most beautiful thing I have heard in a very long time." Lisa looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I thank you," she whispered. "I was so scared. I thought I would forget the notes. You didn't forget, he said kindly. You remembered exactly who you were. The manager, Mr. Henderson, had come out of the office when he heard the clapping. He stood near the kitchen door, looking stunned. He looked at the piano, then at Lisa, then at the cheering customers. He didn't look angry about the broken rules anymore. He looked like he was trying to figure out if the girl in the stained apron was the same person who had just played like a master. Lisa curtsied awkwardly, a little habit she had kept from her childhood music lessons. The crowd clapped even louder. She felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the applause. It was the feeling of being seen. She wasn't just the girl who brought the water anymore. She was Lisa, the musician. She felt tall. She felt strong. She looked back at the piano one last time. The black and white keys sat there, innocent and still. They looked different now. They didn't look like a forbidden machine. They looked like a friend. She took a deep breath and turned to walk back to the service station. But Mr. Vance gently touched her arm to stop her. Not so fast, he said with a knowing smile. You have a room full of fans, and I am not quite done with you yet. Lisa froze, wondering what else could possibly happen. The night had already been more magical than anything she could have imagined. She looked at his face and saw that he had a plan. The Tycoon wasn't just a listener. He was a man who liked to make things happen. And Lisa had a feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even guess. The applause finally started to die down, but the energy in the room felt different now. It was electric, buzzing with a shock that nobody had expected when they walked in for dinner. Lisa stood by the piano bench, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear this time, but from the rush of adrenaline. She looked out at the sea of faces. People were smiling at her. The businessmen who had ignored her earlier were now looking at her with respect. The young couples were whispering to each other, probably wondering who she was. It was the strangest feeling in the world to go from being invisible to being the most important person in the room in just 5 minutes. Mr. Vance turned away from her for a moment and signaled to Roger. The Mater D. Roger hurried over, looking flushed and excited. Yes, sir? Roger asked, looking a bit dazed. I think this young lady deserves more than just applause, don't you? Mr. Vance asked. Oh, absolutely. Roger nodded quickly. That was incredible. I had no idea. Please bring her a chair from my table, Mr. Vance commanded gently, and a glass of water. She has earned a break, Lisa wanted to protest. She wanted to say that she had to get back to work, that there were dishes to clear and tables to wipe, but the look in Mr. Vance's eyes told her that arguing wasn't an option. He was a man who was used to taking care of things. So, she waited while Roger brought a plush velvet chair from the VIP section and placed it next to the piano. Lisa sat down gratefully. Her feet were throbbing and sitting felt like heaven. Mr. Vance reached into the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket. He pulled out a thick white envelope. It wasn't just a standard bill envelope. It was heavy and cream-colored. He held it out to Lisa. For you, he said simply. Lisa looked at the envelope, then up at him. Sir, you already tipped me? That was far too much. I can't take more. That was a tip for your service as a waitress, Mr. Vance said, his voice firm but kind. This is payment for your performance. And please do not insult my judgment on the price. Art is valuable, and you are an artist. Lisa hesitated. The other customers were watching, curious to see what would happen. She slowly reached out and took the envelope. It was heavy in her hand. She didn't look inside yet. She just held it, feeling the texture of the paper. It felt solid, like a lifeline. Thank you, she whispered. She meant it with all her heart. Mr. Vance wasn't finished. He looked around the room and raised his voice slightly so the people nearby could hear. I am curious. How many of you enjoyed the music tonight? A chorus of agreement went up. Wonderful. Beautiful. Bravo. Mr. Vance nodded. I thought so. Now, I wonder if you all would be willing to help me with a little experiment. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a sleek, silver card holder. He took out a small, simple business card and placed it on top of the piano. Then he turned back to Lisa. Lisa, he said, looking her in the eyes, I know that saving for school is hard. I know that working double shifts in a restaurant to pay for tuition can kill the dream before it even starts. I have a foundation that supports young talent, people who have the gift but not the means. Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. She gripped the edges of the chair. A foundation? Yes. My daughter was a musician, Mr. Vance said, his voice softening. She passed away before she could share her gift with the world. I look for people who have that same spark she had. I saw it in you the moment you looked at that piano. He pointed to the business card on the piano. That card has the number of my private assistant. I want you to call him. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. When you get off work, we are going to have a conversation about your future. I believe you belong in a conservatory, not clearing tables, and I am willing to make that happen. The room went silent again, but this time it was a shocked silence. Someone gasped. Lisa stared at him, her eyes wide. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like something from a movie. But looking at Mr. Vance's face, she didn't see a trickster. She saw a father who missed his daughter and wanted to help someone else live their dream. I don't know what to say, Lisa stammered, tears spilling over her cheeks now. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't care about her makeup anymore. This is a miracle. No, Mr. Vance said softly. It's just opportunity. You did the work. You practiced the scales. You kept the dream alive while you were scrubbing floors. I'm just opening the gate. You still have to walk through it. He reached into his pocket one last time and pulled out a pen. He took the heavy white envelope back from her for a second and scribbled something on the front. There, he said, handing it back to her. I have written a personal note. It explains everything to the manager, just in case you need to leave early tomorrow for an audition. Lisa held the envelope tight against her chest. It felt like it was glowing. For the first time in her life, a heavy weight of worry that she carried on her shoulders every single day. The worry about rent, about tuition, about time running out, felt lighter. It felt like someone had taken a backpack full of rocks off her back. Mr. Vance checked his watch and sighed. I am afraid I must leave. I have a plane to catch. But this has been the best dinner I have had in years. He turned to leave, but then he stopped and looked back at the piano. Take care of that instrument, Lisa, and play for yourself, not just for the customers. It will, she promised. I promise. He buttoned his coat and walked through the restaurant. The crowd parted for him like he was royalty, but he didn't look arrogant. He looked satisfied. As he reached the exit, he turned around one last time. He raised his hand in a small wave to Lisa, and then he was gone. Disappearing into the night, the restaurant slowly came back to life. People started talking again, but the conversations were different. Everyone was talking about the girl and the Tycoon. Lisa sat there for a few more minutes, letting her heart rate slow down. Mr. Henderson, the manager, came over. He didn't look angry anymore. He actually looked a little proud, although he also looked confused about what to do. That was quite something, Lisa, he said, scratching his head. Yes, sir, she said. It was. I suppose you can go home for the night, Mr. Henderson muttered, considering the circumstances. And the tip. Thank you, sir. Lisa carefully packed up her things. She walked out of the restaurant, but she didn't feel the cold wind anymore. She felt warm. When she got to the bus stop, she finally looked inside the white envelope Mr. Vance had given her. It was filled with cash enough to cover 3 months of rent. And underneath the cash was the personal note he had written. It read, Asterisk, don't let the world silence your music. You have a voice. Use it. See you at the audition. Asterisk. Lisa smiled so hard her face hurt. She looked up at the stars in the dark sky. She thought about the jar in her closet. She wouldn't need it anymore. She thought about the long shifts and the sore feet. They wouldn't last forever. The Tycoon had seen her. He had really seen her. And because he did, her life was never going to be the same. The bus pulled up, its headlights cutting through the dark. Lisa stepped on, holding her ticket to a new life in her hand. She wasn't just a waitress going home to sleep anymore. She was a musician, and her song was finally beginning.